Hey guys, Saph here with another Raid Shadow Legends video. Yesterday we had another reveal for the upcoming features that is to do with the awakening and blessing systems, and we got an in-depth guide into how the Iron Towers and the Iron Twin boss, the new dungeon that's finally going to replace the Sky Peak, that is coming into the game, by the sounds of it, very soon. I mean, we've had 2 reveals in 2 weeks, and we've also had the What's Next about 2 weeks ago. It doesn't seem like we're all that far away, guys. So rather than react to that video like I did with the last one, I think Hell Hades has done a reaction already, so if you want to see his opinions on it, I thought what would be a good idea is to take the information we have from that video and try and theory craft with the information we have available to us, because obviously we don't know things like stats, we don't know things like base speeds, base accuracies, we don't know how difficult or how much damage we're going to receive, and figure out how do we build a team, what champions should we be looking to prepare or looking to use, and what teams can we put together, and any of the details that I probably have an opinion on or something that you may not have thought about. So that's what we're going to do in this video. We're going to break that down in detail. I have a video coming out this week as well that is going to look at the rewards you get out of the towers, and currently, based on the information we have, which obviously may not be final, and I know I commented on a Reddit post saying you can't do this kind of math assessment yet. I think now that we've had 3 videos concurrently with all the same content, we can probably do some sort of math assessment, with a massive caveat that any of these numbers could change. I thought it'd be a good idea to look at the rewards, look at how quickly we can get some of these soul stones and essences, and where we should be putting our resources and how we should be managing them. Without further ado, let's take a look at what we have discovered from the new video. So as with these things, I did this for Hydra. I basically did a PowerPoint presentation. We looked at everything you would need, what specific debuffs and buffs, how to beat the boss, and I found some champions and different combinations, and then Hydra obviously came out and it was a completely different kettle of fish, for another word. Hopefully we're not going to have the same thing with this boss. So we've got the Iron Twins in the Iron Towers, that's what I'm going to call it. So the first thing we need to note about the Iron Twins is the affinity is going to change like potion keeps. We're going to have one day on Sunday where there's going to be void, and then we are going to have sort of rotating affinities throughout the week, very much like the potion keeps. Now, obviously, this boss impacts with affinities, which we need to take a look at. We will take a look at when we look at the skill breakdown. But that's why their affinity changes. That is going to be important. So you are going to need to build teams with different affinities. So the way this is going to work, you're going to get 6 keys a day, and then there's an energy usage on top. I'm going to do the assessment around how much energy and everything in the next video when we look at the rewards breakdown. But specifically, 6 keys per day, and then you're going to need to do every affinity separately. So you're going to have to climb the magic keep, then you're going to have to reset and climb the spirit keep, and I would imagine when magic comes back around, it will remember where you got to. So it roughly works out around about 2.5 daily resets, or 2.5 days, because you're going to get to sort of stage 12 at the end of day 2, and then you're going to need 3 more keys to be able to get to stage 15, which obviously is probably going to have the better rewards. There is no difference in energy between stage 13 to 15, so it's probably going to be that stage 15 is better, unlike dungeons where there's obviously a 2 energy jump for stage 25. One thing to note, there's 15 stages in total. However, the level of the boss in the videos at stage 15 is the same level as bosses in stage 25 in dungeons and the top of Doom Tower hard. So the stats are likely to be scaled to that difficulty, not to say that the equivalent stage 15s that we see in other parts of the game. So that's the main things to note there. Separately climbing 15 stages, we're going to need to do 60 total stages. So in terms of how long it's going to take for us to completely climb all of this, depending on difficulty, of course, whether you can do all 6 stages in one day. For an end game player, that's probably not going to be too difficult. For a sort of a mid game player, that's probably going to be much more difficult. The time to complete in total is around about 12 days, 12 daily resets. Technically, on the mathematics, it would be 10, but the way that the reset would work, you'd have to use 3 of your keys when you finished one affinity, rather than being able to save them for the next affinity. So that's about 3 weeks in total to complete, because obviously Void is only going to be there on the weekend, on the Sunday. So it's not too bad for us to get to the highest tiers of rewards, and I know that Void is going to be better than any other affinity. So let's take a look at what the boss is going to do. We have an A1 Voltaic Pendulums. He's going to attack a single enemy and place a decreased crit rate. He'll then place a weaken if the target is already under a decreased crit rate. Now, I don't know if this is going to be a case of he needs to re-rotate back around to that A1, or will he just place a decreased crit rate, then place the weaken if it's placed? Not too sure about that. It's a bit abstract. It doesn't really say. We'll have to test it. So there's a potential that you might need to wait for a full rotation to get that weaken back. So that's good. It means you might not get it on the first blast. After attacking, the initial target attacks all other enemies, places a decreased attack, also places a decreased defense debuff for 4 turns on enemies under decreased attack. That one makes me sound like more likely that is going to have the decreased attack placing and the decreased defense placing in one go, because it doesn't say already under, it says if they're under. So I think it'll happen in order, therefore it will place both debuffs. So in terms of this ability, there's nothing in here that says you can't block it, cleanse it, resist it, remove it. It's just standard debuffs, right? So you can probably resist it with right setup. I don't think that's going to mean you need to bring block debuffs or cleanse. I think there's ways around it. Then we get Fires of Insanity, his A2. It is a 3-turn cooldown. I pulled that from the video. All of them are 3-turn cooldowns. I would be pretty confident as well to suggest that the multiplier for these abilities will be about 3 times attack, because all the other multipliers of all the other bosses tend to navigate around about 3 times attack. Hydra, pretty much all of the heads do 3 times attack on an AoE. So that's probably what it's going to be. I don't know what the attack numbers are, and obviously this boss has attack scaling. That might have adjusted the multiplier. We don't know. So this one is a wall of text. I know it was very difficult to put on, but I thought, let's put it all in one slide. Attacks all enemies, places or extends Iron Brand. This Iron Brand debuff is the new debuff that they've been talking about. It's almost like an enrage counter. That's something for you to keep track of in terms of how much damage you're going to take. The duration of Iron Brand debuff given depends on the number of each enemy's defense. The enemy with the highest defense will receive 10 turns, the enemy with the lowest next highest, and vice versa. I would advise anyone to completely ignore that mechanic, because the next ability is going to do the same thing with the attack. There's no real way to avoid it. And if you drop your defense so they don't get an Iron Brand, and they're just going to lose damage reduction. So this effect where it's talking about someone's going to get more than others is really not important. It's not going to matter. As long as the champion with the highest defense and the champion with the highest attack isn't the same champion, which is going to be very unlikely. And if it is, that's where you do care. You should be okay. But otherwise, I wouldn't worry too much about this mechanic at all. And when you hear my strategies, I'll tell you why it's even more important. You don't need to worry about it. But effectively, it's a scaling thing. Look at all champions. Which one has the highest defense? You get 10. The next one, 9, 8, 7, and vice versa. And this is going to be a stacking buff, for a better word. Iron Brand debuffs cannot be blocked or removed, but they can be resisted. And that is very important, which means we can completely negate this effect. Growth effect. So it's a passive. Every time this skill is used, the Iron Twins defense will increase by 2.5%, plus an additional 1% for every enemies who does not match the Iron Twins. So you want to have matching affinities. Now, this is different to how we would normally play it. Normally, we would have strong affinity and avoiding weak affinity. Obviously, everyone knows if you don't know, weak affinity means you don't land any debuffs, so you generally don't want weak affinity. And most people would prefer to go strong affinity because the enemy might weak hit you. It gives you like innate tankiness, effective HP that you don't normally have. In this instance, we actually don't care about strong or weak. We want equal. We want neutral. So if it's a void tower, we want 5 void champions. If it's the force tower, we want 5 force champions in an ideal world. The Iron Twins will not use this skill when their HP is below 40%. So obviously that tells us nuke, 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 get to 40% as fast as possible. Now, the thing to note here, Iron Brand can be resisted. So immediately my head is going increase accuracy, decrease accuracy, increase resistance, and try and out-resist it. Resistance auras, resistant builds, and then this becomes far more easier to manage because the only thing you need to worry about is making sure your affinities match. The rest of it is just damage you need to tank. We'll go into that in more detail in a bit. The next ability, Ruinous Swath, is basically the same ability in reverse. So instead of it now being based on the champion with the highest defense, it's now the champion with the highest attack that's going to get the highest number of Iron Brands. The Iron Brand debuff is the same. And obviously with the growth effect, now it's going to be flipped. So they're going to gain attack instead of defense. The attack is probably more scary than the defense, although you don't want the defense to get out of control. Otherwise, you're never going to kill the boss. So managing that growth effect is really important. If you can imagine it starts at 1000 defense, it's probably not going to, but if it did, then 2.5% defense is not that much. We're talking, quick maths in my head, 1000, is that 25? Yes. 25 extra defense, not a lot. Same with attack. However, if you get to a situation where they are at 4000 base and you add 10% every single time, that's going to get out of hand very quickly. Like the last skill, this skill cannot be used after 40%. So again, it's the same effect really. We can deal with both abilities by just focusing on decrease in accuracy, increase in our resistance, resist the iron brand, and match our affinities. So the next ability the boss has is almost like an A4 special ability, Doomsday Machine. I noticed this was a 2-turn cooldown. He's going to attack all enemies 2 times, and he's going to place or extend the iron brand debuff. It's the same iron brand debuff. We can resist it, but you can't block or remove it. The first hit places an iron brand for the defense stat. So again, looking at the highest defense, placing 5. The second hit is going to do it for attack. So it's working exactly the same way. So we basically got a combined skills of A2 and A3 here, but in half the amount of iron brand stacks. After the first 2 hits, then it attacks the enemies again. The damage inflicted to each enemy increases according to the number of turns remaining on the iron brand's debuffs. This hit will ignore 30% of each target's defense. And then of course we have a passive skill similar to the other two. Every time this skill is used, the Iron Twins attack and defense will be increased by 4%. So we're getting more here, plus an additional 1% for every enemy whose affinity does not match the Iron Twins. The Iron Twins will only use this skill when their HP is below 40%. Priority of this skill is going to be important. Are they going to go A3 first, or are they going to do A2 first? Is it going to do this? Is it going to go A3 then this? This is important. The key thing to note here is very much like the Celestial Griffin. He has that kind of a rage mechanic where if he gets enough feather stacks and you hit above 10, he starts getting more powerful, and eventually you just cannot sustain the amount of damage he outputs. This is going to be the same mechanic here. If you let the iron brands get out of control, this third hit on this Doomsday Machine is going to annihilate your team. So that's why controlling the iron brands, resisting them, or actually killing it quickly so you don't get too many stacks is going to be the priority here. Plus again, we need to make sure we are matching affinity. If you think the other one was 2.5, if this is 4% and you have another 5 people who are not matching, that's 9% increase. That's too much. That is way too much. So that's going to get out of control very quickly, especially with the other 2 abilities going on. You can keep stacking them up. If it's just 4% and 2.5%, you're probably never going to need to worry about it. And then finally, we have a passive. This is the Ice Golem component. I very much think this boss is Ice Golem meets Celestial Griffin in one space. You have the same passive as Ice Golem. Whenever the Iron Twins HP drops below 85%, 70%, 55%, and 40%, instantly attacks all enemies, then removes all debuffs from the Iron Twins. Now, it doesn't say which skill it uses, but it will do it against all enemies. Fills the Iron Twins turn meter by 10% whenever an enemy receives a buff. Will not fill their turn meter if the Iron Twins are under decrease speed debuffs. Decrease speed all of a sudden becomes a number 1 priority. If the Iron Twins keep gaining turn meter, they're going to do more A2s, more A3s, more Doomsday Machines. They're going to stack more of their primary stats, more Iron Brand stacks. You can see how it can get out of control. So decrease speed, it's important. Decrease speed as well is really good to keep the boss slower anyway, so that's always a good bonus. The Iron Twins receive 50% less damage from each subsequent hit from multi-hit skills. The damage reduction increases with every additional hit. The Iron Twins are immune to turn meter reduction effects. I think what that basically means is you can use decreased speed to reduce his speed, but you cannot reduce the turn meter at all. Multi-hitters are going to have less priority here. You want big single hits, but you also need to keep in mind the passive. You don't want to proc that passive if you can't tank the damage. One thing that people do with Ice Golem to solve that problem is they use poison activators, or they just use poisons. So I think poisons here is going to have another vein of success. Theodore's value is probably going to go even higher. Uragrim, people like Tyre, people like Venomage, Darkhail, these champions that can poison passively without doing damage and activate the poisons will hopefully bypass the HP barriers, and if it acts the same way as Ice Golem, won't proc this passive. Now that's something obviously I'm suggesting could be the case, but that's not something I know for sake because I haven't had a chance. It's not on a test server. We can't see it being played out. We don't know until we actually see it in the game. But that's what I would suggest is going to happen here. That is what the boss does in detail from the video. How do we beat this boss? I also did a bit of looking on the sort of video to see what kind of passives we had in addition to those, because they didn't mention it. Looks like he's got Almighty Strength. It's got the same icon, so that means that max HP will be capped at 10%, and it looks like he's also got Almighty Immunity, which is the usual immunities to CCs, block active skills, petrification, those things. So it doesn't look like there is any limitations potentially on poison activation. So the basic assumptions here, what do we need to do? Well, we need decreased speed, 100%. That seems to be a required debuff. We want affinity matching as best as possible, no strong or weak. We want identical affinities. We need the standard debuffs, decrease defense, weaken, decrease attack, the usual stuff that we would bring to actually kill a boss or keep a boss from killing us. High resist is probably a good option. Increase resistance buff, there's a specific 2 champions that do that, not many. Or bring in decreased accuracy to bring the numbers down required for your resistance numbers. And I think max HP will still be pretty strong, although needs to be managed with the passive. And I think poisons as well will be MVP here more than HP burn. Just a note on poisons, I did try to look at the video to see what was happening with poisons. It's very difficult because we don't know what stage they're running it at. So it could be that they were just showing poisons on a really low stage. But I did see that one boss was around about 490,000 health because I could see 25,000 sort of procs from the poison. So that's probably worth doing if it's going to do the 5%. I don't think Poison Explosion is the answer because that converts into an enemy max HP skill. But Poison Activation, like Theodore, like Tyre, like Dark Kale, those champions that can activate the poisons, they're going to be very valuable because I think they will bypass the Almighty Immunity unless they do something to specifically deal with that problem. Let's have a look at some MVPs for those roles. Decrease speed. What I've tried to do here is pick some champions that reliably and consistently to a high level of sort of probability, chance, whatever word you want to use, to land the debuff. So obviously Krisk comes in here as probably the MVP of Void if you have him, because he does everything else. He's got increased speed for your team. He's got decreased speed on an A1. He's got that passive. He's got everything in his kit. But Kurzad Deep Heart is a rare Void. Will do it on an A1 100% of the time as long as he crits. And it's a single boss encounter. There's no waves, so you just have to keep him alive and he will always keep that decreased speed up on his A1. He does bring a secondary decreased defense and an increased accuracy if you want. The decreased defense is pretty weak. It's only the lower version, it's the tier 1 version. But guaranteed A1 decreased speed, you don't need a Krisk to do it. Krisk is better just because of everything else he brings, but Kurzad can do it for you. In terms of magic, you're probably going to look at Lady Kimmy if you've got her. She's got decreased accuracy as well as decreased speed, as well as increased speed, as well as increased accuracy and turn meter on your team. She's a monster for this kind of stuff. I would highly recommend considering using her. And even though multi-hitters is not good in terms of damage, Royal Guard is max HP. He's a decreased defense A1 and he's got a decreased speed on his A3. That is pretty reliable to land. So Royal Guard is probably going to be there as an MVP for your magic. Spirit decreased speed actually has quite a lot of champion options, to the extent that I actually made a second slide after this to go through other decreased speed options in Spirit. Tomb Lord is probably up there as the number 1, mainly because you can get him from the life token vendor if you want. And also he brings poisons and decreased attack and decreased defense. The 3 main things really you need in this boss, in my opinion. Theodore was also another very strong option, but obviously he's a relatively new legendary, and if you didn't get him in your chase because you didn't want to become a Kraken, it's understandable. But if you don't have those legendaries, good old Stag Knight. Decreased attack, decreased defense, single target, decreased speed, only 2 abilities. He's got increased accuracy on a passive kind of thing. He will do the job for you. He's very good. Force-wise, Fenchy for me is actually going to be very high in priority. He's a very strong damage dealer with poisons. He does poisons, and he's got an A1 decreased speed. Triple hit that's got a very good chance of landing over 3 hits. And also Old Gruckus. You probably would never use either of these champions if you were anywhere near the late or end game, but Old Gruckus has a decreased attack and a decreased speed. Very good champion to use for that affinity. As I said, speed, when I looked at it, Spirit had so many options for champions here. I've pulled out a bunch of different epics and rares and legendaries. Theodore is probably going to be number 1 for most players. If that poison activation does work how I expect, I think he could even potentially solo this boss. He's that strong. Snick Track is a relatively new legendary, but again, he's got Leech, he's got decreased speed on a regular basis, and he's also got a shield that can't be removed, so that's really powerful as well. Nekmothar was a guaranteed champion, so I'm including him in here basically because of that factor, and he was also in the times 10 that's on, I think, today or tomorrow. I'm recording this on Monday or Tuesday. Nekmothar was a guaranteed champion, and he's also in the times 10 from this weekend, and I think he's a monster here as well as a monster in Hydra. He's going to give you turn meter and increased speed on a really, really fast regular basis, but he also has Leech and an AoE decrease attack, and he's got decreased speed on that A2. It's not an A1, but it's an A2, and his extra turn and boosting will mean he'll get back around to that skill pretty quickly. So Nekmothar is another good champion. The only thing to note with Nekmothar is if you open with his A3, then obviously you're going to give a lot of buffs and turn meter to the boss, so keep that in mind. Suzerain Catone has a good odds for doing decreased speed. Not much else in his kit, but it's a good shout out. Venax is a very big damage dealer. He's also got a decreased defense and a decreased speed on the A3, and he's got some power and utility on the A2 for block buffs, although that's probably not much use here. But in terms of just raw damage output with a decreased speed, Venax is your man. I use Venax a lot in high-end arena these days. Also got Jingle Hunter. Jingle Hunter, I think, is a very, very reliable decreased speed on his ability. He's not great for this encounter in the sense that he's got freeze in his kit, but generally, if all you care about is, I need a champion imp from my roster that can do decreased speed, someone like Jingle Hunter and even Masked Fearmonger can do it on a regular basis, either a 2-turn duration, 3-turn cooldown, or high probability. And finally, we got Templar. I think Templar is almost like an emergency option. If you have none of these other options, you can go to a Templar. Some people used him solo in Bommel, but his decreased speed can be used here as well. So you've got loads of options for Spirit. Not so many options in some other affinities, but plenty of different options. They don't have to be legendaries here. Let's talk about the other thing that I think you will probably need to bring, which is max HP damage. I know it's capped at 10% probably, but it's still really going to be quite strong in terms of damage if you can manage the 85% boundaries. Obviously, you'll be capped at 10%. So if you're clever and you play around with the checkpoints for that passive, you can do your max HP, use poison to basically trick yourself over as long as it does what I think it's going to do, and then you've got space to do the next max HP to get you closer to that 40% mark, which is when everything becomes much easier. So what champions are we going to use here? Well, Cold Heart. Cold Heart for Void is brilliant. Not only does she have max HP, if you get a heal reduction out, Old Man Gruckus has a heal reduction, for example, in Force, if you did need to min-max. I think Tyre, for example, has heal reduction. We're going to talk about Tyre in a minute. But in terms of kind of damage and other utility, she's actually very good. Yes, her other abilities are multi-hit, so they won't do as much damage, but that's actually desirable. You don't want all your champions pumping out loads of damage because you won't control those barriers then. Obviously, I've already talked about Rolgar for decreased speed, but he's a max HP as well. He's probably your best option in Magic. For Spirit, look no further than Septimus. I think Septimus is going to be making a return back here. That is a really strong max HP, hits really hard, doesn't really bring anything else to the fight, but that's okay. I think his max HP is good enough. And then for Force, you probably would have used these husks in Hydra if you've been doing any sort of Hydra in late to end game. In early game, you may not have him used or built up, but he's actually a really solid champion in 60 anyway, combined in Hydra, Secret Rooms. He does have some utility in sort of stun and provoking, so it might be good for Magma Dragon. I would use a husk for this max HP role. Now, the most important thing I think is going to be after decreased speed is poisons here. And these are the champions that I'm basically saying are very, very good, in my opinion, for this new boss. Tyre for me is a free Doom Tower epic that you get, I think, after I think she's the last epic in the last round of tier 2, so the Dark Kale rotation. She, on her A3, can proc any poisons and HP burns by 1 turn, so she activates. So if you build up some poisons on a team and then use that sort of blood boil, she'll just activate the poisons and hopefully bypass the barrier, a bit like Theodore does. She also brings a decreased accuracy on an A1. That's going to be really important to trying to resist that Iron Brand that we were talking about before. And she also brings heal reduction, which paired with your Cold Hearts can get you more poison stacking, which gets you more blood boil, which gets you further to the end quicker. Once you're at 40%, you can go ham and you don't even need to stress so much. I think Tyre might become an MVP for this area. She's a free champion if you've done your normal rooms, and anyone in sort of late game is probably doing a lot of the normal rooms rather than the hard, so you're going to get there eventually. It is a shame we can't pick the champions we want from Doom Tower. I don't really understand that, because I would have included Chromax as a possible option for some things in this encounter, but I can't include him because it takes so long to get him. So Tyre for me, 100% MVP for Void, and probably one of the better champions for this than I can think of off the top of my head. In terms of Magic, Dark Kale would be my person to go to. Not only do you get the really strong passive, which will mean that the boss probably cannot crit hit you, which is going to be potentially important if you're not resisting the Iron Brands. I would suggest you do resist the Iron Brands, but if you're not, that passive will mean any poison he places or that is on the boss, you cannot get critically hit by the boss because they always have 15% crit rate. In addition, he has that A1 activation chance of poisons, so he will hopefully push the poisons down by 1 turn. It's not as good as someone like Tyre or Theodore because they activate all poisons. He'll only activate a certain amount and it's not guaranteed, but a lot of people use Dark Hill and speed runs for that paired with Kaimar for the poisons. If you pair him with another poisoner, it could be really good. In addition, he's also got an AoE decrease attack. Now, AoE is not important here, but an extension with decreased attack will help you stay alive and keep those poisons up. So for magic, my MVP here is Dark Kale. For spirit, as it's probably not a surprise, Theodore is my MVP. He is an absolute monster for this kind of poison activation job. He will extend all those poisons. He will proc those poisons. He never attacks, so you can never worry about proccing that milestone if it's going to work the same way as Ice Golem. And he's probably even potentially capable, I would say, of even maybe soloing this boss if it all works out how I think it's going to. It's very difficult to know without the stats and without all the full details and the static and the sort of exporting of the data mining. But in general, I think Theodore here is an amazing position for this. He should be, if you've got him, he should be in your spirit team 100%. And finally, for force, I'm going to recommend you use Fenchi for this. He does have a really strong hit. If you can get up to 10 poisons, it'll ignore defense for every poison that's on the boss, but he will put poisons out, and he does have that decreased speed, so you've got two people doing one job, and that's always desirable. So what about decreased accuracy? I've talked a lot about how you deal damage to the boss. Well, you don't want those iron brands going on. The best way to do that is either through an increased resistance buff, which is very difficult to get hold of. Only 2 champions in the game actually have it right now. Or decreased accuracy, which is much more accessible, so that the boss's accuracy numbers come down. You don't have to build as much resistance, and it kind of guarantees much better results in your fight. Kind of like the way you would approach Bommel here. So for Void, I've already talked about Tyre. I'd 100% recommend using her. She is free, but Sylar is also another good option. Yes, her turn meter reduction won't work, but the decreased speed, the AoE for the decreased accuracy will work, and her damage output is low enough that she isn't going to affect the passive in any way. So Sylar is a good option for Void if you don't have Tyre yet. In terms of magic, we return back to the Lady Kimmy. As I said, she is a monster. She's got all the main effects here that you would need. But if you don't, then you can go to a fusion champion, Herndig. He has decreased defense, he has weaken, he has decreased accuracy in his kit. He also has damage, so he will help push you towards that 40%. He is a great option for this, in my opinion. There are probably some epics, I think, that you can do. I think Alaric is a magic-based one. He may be force, I can't remember. But I recommend these two, and I've used a fusion champion here that some people might have. In terms of spirit, the one that most people might have, as it was a recent one in December, is Tatora Rhymehide. A1 decrease accuracy with some defensive capability with that shield and that AoE Veil. So hopefully it'll keep your team alive. Obviously, Veil isn't going to matter here in the sense that all the boss's attacks are AoE apart from the first attack, the A1. However, Veil does reduce the incoming damage, so it's still very powerful. Alternatively, if you didn't get Tatora, you can use Gorlos Helmor as a great option. He has HP burn as well in his kit, and he's an AoE decrease defense 100% chance when booked. Gorlos is a very underrated champion, especially for Demon Spawn faction, where actually there isn't many decreased defense options. So Gorlos Helmor is great. This is where I actually found a champion that I would never have thought about would be good for this, but actually when you look at the kit is very strong, and that is Corpse Collector. Undead Horde Epic, and her kit for this is great. She has decreased accuracy. She has poisons. It's a 4-turn cooldown, so not really great for main poisoner, but it's a triple hit, 100% chance to place a 5% poison on 2 turns for a 4-turn cooldown. That's really good. And she has a leech on the A1. So you kind of have like built-in survivability with leech, decreased accuracy, great, and some poisons. That's 3 rolls really. It's well worth considering if you don't have many force options for decreased accuracy. The one that most people will probably naturally go towards is Geomancer. He's actually somewhat not great in the sense that it's not a guaranteed A1, and you kind of want to get that decreased accuracy up as soon as possible. But actually, I think, considering his passive is so strong, he's got HP burn and weaken. He does place those abilities as well, which is nice. I think he's probably going to be used just for the passive alone to reduce incoming damage. So those are the sort of MVPs that I would say for each affinity for decreased accuracy. And then, of course, as I said, there are 2 champions that increase your own resistance. That is Beauregard, and that is Raf Matab. If you are in the right affinities, you can look to use that instead of a decreased accuracy, but I would say go towards the decreased accuracy. It's more accessible, it's easier to build. These are both legendary champions, unless you got the guaranteed champion for Raf Matab when it was released. You probably don't have these champions to hand. So if you're still watching and you're still with me, I thought it would be a good idea to actually show you kind of my first approach to what teams I'm personally going to build with the champions that I have available. And it's going to surprise you how little legendaries I'm using here. I was surprised myself how I'm going much more towards epic champions to solve this dungeon. So for my Void team, I'm thinking of using Sylar for my decreased speed and accuracy here. And I'm going to use 2 Cold Hearts. I have 2 built. I use it for Spider 20 a lot. They're both going to be my max HP, and they're also going to feed poisons towards my Tyre, who's going to be my decreased accuracy and my poison explosion or activation champion. Keep in mind, you don't want to use poison explosion. It's always poison activation. Champions that proc the poison to take a turn, not the ones that consume it, then do damage. Like Xavier and Elenarl are not to be included here. That will be capped at 10%. And then I'm going to throw in Lydia, basically, because I need a decreased defense, a weaken. She'll give me strength and increased speed and just keep my team bit of support and utility. And that is my team I'm probably going to go for Void. I'm a little bit on the fence about the Lydia as to whether or not I go for something with a little bit more security. I don't really have a decreased attack in this team, which is a concern. Maybe I'll drop a Cold Heart out and bring in a decreased accuracy and just run with 1 max HP. That's an option as well. But it's almost a Dark Elf Faction Wars team. That's where I'm at with Voids. And when we think of accessibility here, we've got 2 rare Voids. I know some people in the comments will be like, oh, it's so difficult to get some Voids. I understand that, but they're rare champions, so they're more accessible. They're also Voids, which means the pool of champions is smaller. Lydia's a free champion. We've got Tyre, it's a free champion once you get to her. And then you've got Sylar, which is an epic. There are no legendaries that you have to pull here. And that is an accessible team, in my opinion. For Magic, I've decided obviously to go with Lady Kimmy. That's probably the most elite champion I have in my teams. And obviously you wouldn't need to pull her. But you can use any Magic decreased speed and decreased accuracy here. There are other options to use. I'm going to use her just because she covers decreased speed, increased speed, and decreased accuracy in one go. I'm using my Royal Guard here as a backup decreased speed and a max HP. We have got Venomage. I brought in Venomage just to give Darkhail some poisons and also to make use of the passive sort of healing, the damage reduction she has when the heal reduction is out. So that should hopefully reduce the incoming damage for my team. And then I'm using Darkhail to activate those poisons, and he's doing decreased attack. And the last champion I slotted in was Taragi the Frog. Got ally protection, some healing, some shielding, and more poisons effectively to keep feeding the Kale. So you can see the plan here. Feed poisons, let Kale proc the poisons, and that's how I'm going to beat the boss. We're going to keep the accuracy low. We're going to build their resistance up. I might even put them in regen sets as well, just to keep the team healthy and kind of not have to deal with the healing component. That is my team for Magic. Again, when we look at what we've got here, Darkhail is a free champion. You've got 3 epics, and then you've got 1 legendary. It's not as free as the previous team, but you only need the 1 legendary here in this team. Next up, my Spirit team. This is probably a little bit more expensive, but at the same time, based on some things that I didn't actually pull. So we got Tatora Rhymehide here. He's mainly there for decreased accuracy, but he's going to help keep the team alive as well. Increased defense. The Veil will reduce my incoming damage, and also, if it's that single target, it's going to go on him as well. So a solid champion. He was a fusion, so accessible to the extent that if you played the game, you did the fusion, you've got him. Next up, we've got Septimus. He is kind of a champion you need to pull, but you can use another max HP here if you want to in the Spirit, or you take him out completely and just do more poisons. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to use Urticata here. She's an actually very strong poisoner. There are some other options you could use in terms of poisoners for Spirit. Obviously, if I had Theodore, he'd be in my team. I don't have Theodore. And there are other Spirit poisons like Richthof the Bold is an honorable mention that you could definitely use here. But I'm going to be using Urticata because my team as a whole will then poison the boss rather than relying on a single champion. We then have Kyoku. She is going to keep my team alive. She is a beast at it. A decreased attack has been built in there. If I time it correctly with Nekmothar, I can probably get the HP burnout. It's a bit tricky to do, but that's possible. She's also got weaken as well. So that's the champion I'm going to bring here. She's going to do my ally protection, and she's going to block damage so that she mitigates basically half the damage into thin air. And finally, we've got Nekmothar. Nekmothar is going to just boost my team to get more poisons out onto the boss. I haven't got decreased defense here. I'm going to try and kill it exclusively with poisons and just let the poisons do its work and stay alive. Obviously, resistance, decreased accuracy is important, so I need to make sure that Tatora keeps doing A1s. The good thing is Tatora is an A1 decreased accuracy, so the likelihood of a 3% or something falling off is less of a problem because you can constantly keep maintaining it. That's my Spirit team. It is a little bit more pay to win, not as accessible as my Void team, but Nekmothar was a guaranteed champion. I won Kyoku in a training tournament. Okay, I didn't really say I wailed for it, but you would have potentially had to. Tatura was a fusion, and Urticata is an epic, so it is a bit more pay to win. But there are options that you can do to limit this. I'm picking my best team that I know that will do it much quicker. And finally, Force. Force is a little bit more trickier for me. I found it very difficult to find the right balance. Fenshi was obviously locked in straight away with Husk. Those two were pretty much straightforward. There's my decreased speed, there's my poison, there's my damage. easy. Husk is also HP based, so you can keep him alive relatively easy. So you don't have to worry about keeping sort of defense numbers up. Geomancer then came in for the decreased accuracy and the HP burn and the weaken, and also that passive that's going to reduce incoming damage, which basically left me in a position of, well, I need kind of decreased defense, I need a little bit of survivability here, and I need to keep my team alive. To be honest, I'm not too happy with this one over the other three. I feel like I probably need to bring like a decreased defense in here somewhere. Maybe I need to swap out the Vasolve for something better. Maybe the Rector on her own will keep the team alive with her additional healing from the Veil passive. But Rector Drath is probably really good to bring for decreased attack. That solves that problem. So it's probably just I'll end up swapping Vasolve out for maybe someone that's got decreased defense just to speed up the fight. Otherwise, I'm not outputting as many poisons as I am in, say, my Spirit team or my other teams. So that's, again, really accessible. We've got basically 4 epics. One of them you could have at one point got as a starter champion. I don't know whether that's going to make a difference at all, but you could have. And then we've got a fusion ally protector. And again, Vasolve, I really think I'm not so sure about in this team. But we've got Husk, which you probably are already using for Hydra, so you don't need to invest too much. Fench, you might need an investment. Geomancer could be in your clan boss team already. So again, I'm looking here and I'm thinking, well, it's actually not that bad. It's not too pay to win. That's a pretty accessible team. So there you go, guys. It's a bit of a longer video than I planned, to be honest, but I hope that's kind of helped you approach and think, okay, what champions do I need to focus on? What kind of teams do I need to build? What things do I need to get ready for the Iron Twins when they come out? I think they're coming out in about 2 weeks, if I'm being honest. The next patch, it feels like that's where they're gonna be launched into the game. So we don't have an awful lot of time to sort of prepare. What I would say is don't go crazy investing into champions, specifically legendaries, on my advice, in the sense that I'm assuming some things are going to happen. I'm assuming that Poison Explosion is going to be a thing. I'm assuming that that passive is going to allow me to bypass it with poisons. Now, if that's not the case, the strategy might change. It could be that the defense numbers are so low that you can just one-shot it with champions. I don't know. I would imagine it's not going to be the case, because that would make the content really sort of solvable overnight. But certainly some of these epics, if they're in the vault, pull them out, get them ready in 50 just in case it works. Make sure you've got some resources. We are in a clan versus clan, so booking some of these epics that I've talked about that you maybe not have thought about might be a good option. So I hope that was helpful. I will do a follow-up video when we actually get it released, where I will discuss, did I change my teams? These are my teams that I'm going to now build and lock in and start preparing for, because I'm pretty confident that that's what's going to happen. And in that video, I'll actually see if the reality has made sense to my theory crafting here. But with that said, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more content and you want to keep an eye out for those upcoming videos, please give our channel a subscribe. We do appreciate all the comments that you give us in the video below. Let me know if you have any champions that you're thinking about pulling out of the vault that I haven't talked about here. If you have any different strategies or any different opinions about what you think the boss will be like, please let me know. But other than that, I'll catch you in the next video.